He introduced me at the company gala as just the wife who warmed his bed and dinners. The crowd chuckled. I kept my gaze low, humiliated, burning but silent. Then the CEO stepped forward, clapping me on the back. "We're thrilled to welcome our new head of global operations," he said. My husband froze. His smirk flickered, then vanished. "She's basically my personal chef and bed warmer," Brian announced to the corporate crowd. What he didn't know was that the board had already made their decision. About me. Not him. The words hung in the air like poison as 37 executives turned to look at me. Some smiled politely. Others chuckled. Margaret from accounting, the same woman who'd complimented my quarterly analysis last week, actually giggled behind her wine glass. I stood there in my navy dress, the one Brian had chosen because it made me look appropriate for corporate functions, watching faces I'd studied for years. These were people whose emails I'd answered, whose reports I'd ghostwritten, whose strategies I'd crafted during countless late nights while Brian watched television downstairs. "Brian, you're absolutely terrible," laughed Robert from finance, raising his whiskey toward my husband. "Where'd you find such a devoted one?" My wedding ring felt like it was cutting off circulation. The chandelier above cast sharp shadows across the marble floor, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear into one of them. This wasn't the first time Brian had reduced me to domestic functions in public, but something about tonight felt different. Final. "She's also excellent with my laundry," Brian continued, his voice growing bolder with each laugh he earned. "Really knows her way around a washing machine." The CEO, Liam Morrison, stood near the bar watching this performance with an expression I couldn't quite read. Our eyes met briefly across the room and something passed between us. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. My cheeks burned as another wave of polite laughter rippled through the group. The woman standing next to me, someone from the Tokyo division, leaned closer and whispered, "You're so lucky to have found someone who appreciates the simple things." Lucky. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "Well, we should all be so fortunate," said another voice. "A woman who knows her place in the world." Her place. My place apparently was heating up Brian's dinner and warming his bed. Not analyzing market trends or developing expansion strategies. Not the woman who'd single-handedly saved the Morrison account last quarter, or the one who'd identified the supply chain vulnerabilities that saved the company $2 million. "I think I need some air," I murmured, but nobody heard me. They were too busy enjoying Brian's comedy routine. I slipped away toward the bar, my heels clicking against the marble with each step. The bartender, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, poured champagne without me asking. "Rough evening," she whispered. "You could say that." The champagne tasted flat, watered down like everything else in my life had become. From across the ballroom I could see Brian still holding court, probably moving on to jokes about my grocery shopping skills or my ability to fold his shirts properly. That's when I felt a presence beside me. "Enjoying the festivities?" Liam's voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. "It's been enlightening," I replied, choosing my words carefully. He studied my face with the same intensity he brought to board meetings. "I've been meaning to discuss the Peterson proposal with you." The board was particularly impressed with the risk assessment analysis. My heart stopped. The Peterson proposal, the one Brian had presented last month as his own work. The one I'd researched and written during 3 sleepless weeks while he attended golf tournaments with clients. "I'm glad it was well received," I managed. "Your projection models were remarkably sophisticated. We rarely see that level of strategic insight." Liam's eyes held mine steadily. "The board specifically noted the innovation in your market penetration strategies." The noise of the party faded into background static. He knew. Somehow this man knew exactly who had crafted that proposal. "There's something else," Liam continued, lowering his voice. "We've been discussing organizational restructuring. New leadership positions. The board believes fresh perspective is exactly what we need for our global expansion." He pressed a business card into my palm. "Call me Monday morning. We have much to discuss about your future here." Then he walked away, leaving me standing at the bar with trembling hands and a piece of cardstock that felt heavier than platinum. I spent the remainder of the evening watching Brian network and charm potential clients, completely oblivious to the conversation that had just altered the trajectory of everything. He introduced me to 4 more people as his better half, though we both knew which half actually did the thinking. During the taxi ride home, Brian chatted excitedly about his conversations with prospective investors. The alcohol had made him generous, almost affectionate. "You looked good tonight," he said, patting my knee condescendingly. "Nice to have you there for moral support." Moral support. The phrase echoed in my head as streetlights blurred past the window. Liam's business card was hidden in my purse like contraband, like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet committed. That night, I lay in bed listening to Brian's satisfied snoring. For 15 years I'd been the ghost author of his success story. I'd researched his presentations, written his proposals, and refined his ideas until they sparkled. I'd made him look brilliant while erasing myself completely. But tonight had crystallized something essential. The humiliation at the gala wasn't just embarrassment. It was revelation. I saw our entire marriage through new eyes. The gradual disappearance of my identity, the systematic dismissal of my contributions, the way I'd allowed myself to become background music in my own life. Liam's words replayed endlessly. "Your future here. Not Brian's future. Not our shared future. Mine alone." I slipped quietly from bed and retrieved the business card from my evening bag. In the moonlight filtering through our bedroom curtains, the embossed letters seemed to glow with possibility. Monday morning I would dial that number. Monday morning I would stop being Brian's invisible assistant and start reclaiming the woman I'd buried beneath years of silent service. The architect of his career was about to step out from behind the curtain. The gala had shattered something inside me, but it had also awakened something I'd forgotten existed. My own voice, my own ambition, my own undeniable worth. And for the first time in over a decade I wasn't afraid to claim them. Monday morning arrived with coffee that tasted like regret. I sat at our kitchen table, Liam's business card hidden beneath a stack of unpaid bills, watching Brian scroll through his phone while eating the breakfast I'd prepared without thinking. "Peterson wants to fast-track the Singapore expansion," he said, not looking up. "Looks like my proposal really impressed the board." My proposal. The words sat heavy in my throat, unspoken. It hadn't always been this way. 20 years ago, Brian Mitchells had been the kind of man who made elevators feel smaller just by stepping inside. Broad shoulders, easy smile, the confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. I was 23, working reception at Hartwell Industries, fresh from business school with dreams bigger than my paycheck. "You're wasted behind that desk," he told me at the company holiday party. "Someone with your brains should be running departments, not answering phones." Those words had felt like sunlight after years of professors who'd dismissed my questions and supervisors who'd handed me filing instead of opportunities. Brian saw potential where others saw a pretty face and fast typing skills. "Let me help you," he'd whispered during our third date, his hand covering mine across a candlelit table. "We could be unstoppable together." Marriage came fast. Within 18 months, I was Mrs. Brian Mitchells, trading my cramped studio apartment for his spacious townhouse and my entry-level position for what he called strategic planning from home. "Think of it as an investment," Brian had explained when I'd hesitated about leaving Hartwell. "You help me establish myself and then we'll have the resources for you to start your own consultancy. Partnership, not sacrifice." The plan made sense. Brian had energy and charm, but his presentations lacked depth. His analysis was surface level, his strategic thinking limited to quarterly targets. I had the analytical mind, the research skills, the ability to see patterns others missed. Our first collaboration was a market assessment for a potential client. Brian handled the schmoozing while I crafted the actual strategy. When they signed a 6-figure contract, we celebrated with champagne and plans for our future empire. "See," Brian had said, pulling me close in our living room. "We make a perfect team." Team. The word had meant something different then. The request started small. "Could you take a look at this proposal? Just clean up the language." Then they grew. "I need a full competitive analysis by Thursday." Eventually they became expectations. Brian would arrive home with manila folders full of half-formed ideas, dropping them on my desk like homework assignments. I didn't mind initially. Seeing my strategies succeed, watching Brian present concepts I'd developed. It felt like winning by proxy. When he got promoted to senior associate, I felt proud. When clients specifically requested his expertise, I felt accomplished. The Tokyo deal changed everything. Nakamura Industries wanted to expand into North American markets, but their previous consultants had failed spectacularly. Brian came home that Friday night practically vibrating with excitement. "This could be it," he'd said, loosening his tie. "The account that puts me on the partner track. But their requirements are insane. They want a complete market penetration strategy, risk assessments for 12 different sectors, and financial projections for a 5-year rollout." I spent 3 weeks researching Japanese business culture, analyzing currency fluctuations, and modeling scenarios that accounted for everything from political instability to natural disasters. My dining room table disappeared beneath spreadsheets and industry reports. I worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. The night before Brian's presentation, I handed him a leather portfolio containing 60 pages of the most comprehensive strategic analysis I'd ever produced. Charts, graphs, projections, everything color-coded and cross-referenced. "This is incredible," he'd said, flipping through pages. "You've thought of everything." The next evening, Brian came home with a bottle of Dom Perignon and news that Nakamura had signed exclusively with his firm. His bonus was enough for a down payment on the house we'd been dreaming about. "We did it," he'd said, popping the cork. "This calls for celebration." But when he took his team to the steakhouse downtown the following weekend, I wasn't invited. When the company newsletter featured an article about his innovative approach to international expansion, my name appeared nowhere. When Nakamura so personally thanked Brian for his visionary insights, I was washing dishes in our new kitchen. That's when I started paying attention to the pronouns. My strategy secured the Henderson account. Not our strategy. My analysis identified the market gap. Not my analysis that he'd requested on a Tuesday and received on Thursday, fully formatted and footnoted. I tried speaking up once. David Chin from Brian's office had stopped by for dinner, and conversation turned to the Nakamura success. "You know," I'd said, refilling wine glasses, "I should start charging Brian consulting fees for all the research I do." The table went quiet. David laughed nervously. Brian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Later, after David left, Brian cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes held something cold I'd never seen before. "Don't ever embarrass me like that again." "I was just joking." "Were you?" "Because it sounded like you were trying to take credit for my work." "Your work." The words slipped out before I could stop them. "My client relationships. My presentations. My reputation." His voice dropped lower. "You help with research. That's not the same as closing deals or managing client expectations. Don't confuse support with leadership." I never made that mistake again. Years blended together after that. My skills sharpened while my visibility faded. I became fluent in market analysis, expert in strategic planning, masterful at transforming Brian's vague concepts into profitable realities. But my name never appeared on proposals. My insights never earned recognition. My contributions became background noise in the symphony of Brian's ascending career. The irony was perfect. The more successful I made him, the more invisible I became. Each promotion he earned was built on foundations I'd poured. Each accolade he received was for work I'd produced. Each step up his corporate ladder pushed me further into the shadows. I told myself it was temporary. That once Brian reached partner level, he'd have resources to elevate me too. That our success was shared even if the credit wasn't. But success changes people. Or maybe it just reveals who they always were. By the time Brian made senior partner, I'd become his personal think tank, ghostwriter, and research department all rolled into one. He'd hand me complex challenges like I was some kind of intellectual vending machine, expecting brilliant solutions to appear on schedule. The worst part wasn't the lack of recognition. It was watching myself disappear piece by piece, year by year, until I'd become exactly what Brian had introduced me as that night. Just the woman who kept his life comfortable and his career trajectory smooth. Until Liam's business card reminded me that I'd once been someone else entirely. Tuesday morning, Liam's business card was still burning a hole in my purse when Brian burst through the front door with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and that familiar gleam in his eyes. "Cancel whatever you're doing today," he announced, dropping his briefcase on the kitchen counter. Something big just landed on my desk. I looked up from the financial newspapers I'd been reading, a habit I'd developed over the years to stay current with market trends. "What kind of big?" "Global Expansion Initiative. The board wants a comprehensive proposal for international market penetration." Brian loosened his tie, already settling into strategy mode. This could be the project that fast-tracks me to executive level. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. International expansion. Exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered challenge I'd been hoping to tackle for years. The kind of project that required deep market analysis, cultural understanding, and strategic foresight. Timeline? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. 3 weeks. But here's the thing, they want something revolutionary. Not just expansion plans, but a complete reimagining of how we approach global markets. Brian pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table. I need you to work your magic on this one. Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper with bullet points so basic they read like a first-year business student's brainstorm. Expand to Asia, increase market share, maximize profits. Nothing about cultural adaptation, regulatory challenges, or competitive landscape analysis. This is your starting point? I asked. Just the framework. You know how to flesh these things out. Brian was already heading toward the shower. Make it sing, okay? This one matters. As his footsteps echoed upstairs, I stared at that pathetic outline. After 20 years of building his career from the shadows, he still handed me blank canvases and expected masterpieces. But this time felt different. Liam's words from the gala echoed in my mind. We should talk about your real future. Maybe it was time to paint something for myself. I spent the next 2 weeks transforming that amateur sketch into something extraordinary. Not just market analysis, but a complete strategic framework for cultural integration. I researched regulatory environments in 12 different countries, analyzed consumer behavior patterns across 4 continents, and developed risk mitigation strategies for everything from currency fluctuations to political instability. The dining room became my war room. Charts covered every surface, showing demographic trends, economic projections, and competitive positioning. I interviewed suppliers in 3 different time zones, analyzed trade agreements most executives had never heard of, and identified market opportunities that traditional consulting firms consistently missed. But this time I did something different. This time I created 2 versions. The first was what Brian expected. A polished, professional proposal with his name in the header and his usual buzzword-heavy executive summary. Surface-level insights dressed up in corporate speak. The kind of presentation that looked impressive in PowerPoint but crumbled under serious scrutiny. The second version was mine. Real analysis. Genuine innovation. Strategies that could actually revolutionize how the company approached international markets. I included cultural adaptation protocols, partnership frameworks with local distributors, and financial models that accounted for long-term relationship building rather than short-term profit extraction. The difference was night and day. Brian's version read like a Wikipedia summary. Mine read like a blueprint for building an empire. Friday afternoon, I logged into the company's internal submission portal, a system I'd helped Brian navigate countless times but had never used under my own credentials. My hands shook as I uploaded my proposal under my employee profile, the one that listed me as administrative support, but had been quietly updated by HR to reflect my MBA and strategic planning certifications. Brian spent that weekend polishing his presentation, completely confident that I'd delivered my usual ghost-written masterpiece. He practiced in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie and perfecting his confident smile. This proposal is going to change everything, he told his reflection. The board's going to be blown away. I sat on our bed watching him rehearse talking points for strategies he'd never developed, using insights he'd never discovered. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Sunday evening he finally asked to review the final proposal. Just email it to me, he said, not looking up from his phone. I trust you got everything right. I sent him the basic version, the one filled with generic recommendations and recycled corporate wisdom. He skimmed it for maybe 10 minutes before closing his laptop. Perfect, he said. This is exactly what they want to hear. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. Brian left early for a breakfast meeting, kissing my forehead and promising to celebrate his inevitable success that evening. 2 hours later my phone rang. Miss Carter? This is Liam Morrison's office. He'd like to see you this afternoon. 2 o'clock. The boardroom smelled like leather and ambition. Liam sat behind his massive oak desk, my proposal spread open in front of him like evidence in a trial. Close the door, he said quietly. I turned the lock, my heart hammering against my ribs. This proposal, he began, holding up the document, is remarkable. The cultural integration strategies alone are worth implementing immediately. Heat flooded my cheeks. Thank you. The question is, was this your work? The moment stretched between us like a bridge I either had to cross or burn. 20 years of silence had led to this single question. Yes, I said. Every word. Liam leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the same intensity he brought to merger negotiations. The board reviewed 2 proposals for this initiative. One was sophisticated, innovative, genuinely transformative. The other was... He paused diplomatically. Disappointing. My breath caught. 2 proposals? Your husband submitted something this morning that read like a first draft. Buzzwords and platitudes. No substance. Liam's smile was almost paternal. But this is the work of someone who understands global markets at a fundamental level. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the city skyline. We're not just looking for an expansion strategy, Ms. Carter. We're looking for the right person to lead that expansion. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The board has been discussing organizational restructuring. We need someone in Tokyo to oversee our Asian operations. Someone with fresh perspective and proven analytical skills. He turned back to me. Someone who actually wrote the proposal we're about to approve. My hands were trembling. What are you saying? I'm saying we'd like to offer you the position of head of global operations. Effective immediately. The room tilted slightly. Head of global operations. The exact title Brian had been chasing for 3 years. There's a formal announcement being prepared, Liam continued. But I wanted to speak with you first. Privately. Outside his office window, the city stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere in those buildings, Brian was probably having lunch with colleagues, still confident about his afternoon board presentation. When would you need an answer? I asked. Take the weekend, Liam said. But Ms. Carter? The board meets Monday morning. If you say yes, your first responsibility will be presenting this proposal yourself. I walked out of that boardroom carrying a secret that weighed more than gravity itself. For the first time in 20 years, someone wanted to hear my voice instead of hiding it. That evening, I sat in our living room watching Brian practice his presentation one final time, still completely unaware that the woman he'd spent decades silencing was about to speak louder than he ever had. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline silence that precedes earthquakes. I was making breakfast when Brian's phone buzzed with the company-wide email notification. He glanced at it absently while buttering his toast, then froze mid-spread. What the hell is this? His voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. The butter knife clattered against his plate as he stared at his screen, reading and rereading the same message. I poured my coffee with steady hands, though my heart was performing gymnastics. What's what? This email. It says. He looked up at me, confusion creasing his forehead. It says you've been appointed head of global operations. The kitchen went completely still. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to pause, waiting for my response. Yes, I said, taking a sip of coffee. I accepted the position Friday afternoon. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. Brian's face cycled through emotions like a broken slideshow. Confusion, disbelief, something approaching panic. Then he laughed. A short, sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. He was already dialing his phone. I'll call Liam and get this sorted out. Brian. My voice was calmer than I felt. There's no mistake. But he wasn't listening. He was pacing our kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, waiting for someone to answer and fix this obvious clerical error. Liam? It's Brian. We need to talk about this email. What? No, I'm talking about the announcement. Yes, I understand she's qualified, but... I watched 20 years of condescension crumble in real time. Brian's confident tone faltered as whatever Liam was saying on the other end penetrated his certainty. But I submitted the proposal. What do you mean there were 2 versions? The metadata shows what? His face went pale. The phone trembled slightly in his grip. I need to come in, he said finally. We need to discuss this face to face. He hung up and stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. You submitted your own proposal, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. While working on mine. While working on the version you thought you were submitting. I set down my coffee cup. The version with your name on strategies you never developed. For the first time in our marriage, Brian had no immediate response. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sat heavily in his chair. How long? He asked quietly. How long what? How long have you been planning this? The question revealed everything he still didn't understand. He thought this was about revenge, about some elaborate scheme to undermine him. He couldn't conceive that it might simply be about me finally stepping into the light I'd been hiding in for decades. I wasn't planning anything, Brian. I was just tired of being invisible. An hour later, he left for the office with the grim determination of a man preparing for battle. I knew he'd demand meetings, question the decision-making process, probably suggest that my proposal was somehow derivative of his work. I spent the morning cleaning our house with methodical precision, each task a meditation on the seismic shift happening in our lives. When I folded Brian's shirts, I wondered how many times I'd performed this exact routine while crafting the strategies that had built his career. My phone rang at 11:30. Margaret from accounting, her voice bright with excitement. Danielle. I just heard the news. Head of Global Operations. That's incredible. Thank you, Margaret. You know, I always suspected you were the brains behind Brian's success. The way you'd quietly correct details during company functions, or how you always seemed to know more about his projects than he did. She paused. I'm so glad you're finally getting the recognition you deserve. 3 more calls followed. Colleagues congratulating me, some admitting they'd suspected my involvement in Brian's work for years. Apparently, my invisibility hadn't been as complete as I'd thought. Brian came home at 4:30, 2 hours earlier than usual. His face was gray, his tie loosened like a noose that had been partially removed. Well? I asked. He sat at our kitchen table and stared at his hands. They showed me the submission timestamps. Your proposal was uploaded at 10:30 Friday morning. Mine went in at 8:15 Monday. And they ran both documents through plagiarism software. Yours was entirely original. Mine. He swallowed hard. Mine contained paragraphs from 3 different consulting white papers. Strategies you'd used in previous projects. The irony was perfect. While I'd been creating genuinely innovative content, Brian had been recycling my old work without even realizing it. Liam said the board has been watching our department for months. They noticed inconsistencies between the quality of my presentations and my written submissions. Brian's voice was barely a whisper. They knew. What happens now? I've been reassigned to regional account management, reporting to David Chin. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. David was my junior associate 3 years ago. The man who'd spent decades climbing corporate ladders had just been bumped down several rungs. Not fired. The company was too diplomatic for that, but demoted in the most elegant way possible. The Tokyo project? I asked. Yours now. Along with the team I've been managing for the past 5 years. He rubbed his forehead. Sarah Martinez will be your direct report. She used to work under me. Sarah Martinez, the brilliant analyst Brian had consistently overlooked for promotion despite her exceptional work. Another woman whose contributions had been systematically undervalued. I'm sorry this is difficult for you, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want Brian to suffer. I just wanted him to understand. Are you? He asked. Sorry, I mean? The question hung between us like a bridge we both had to decide whether to cross. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said carefully. But I'm not sorry. I finally spoke up. That evening we ate dinner in silence. Brian picked at his food while I reviewed the transition documents Liam had couriered over. Organizational charts, budget allocations, team assignments, all the infrastructure of the department I'd been secretly supporting for years. How does it feel? Brian asked suddenly. How does what feel? Having your name on something for once. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement he'd ever given me. Not an apology exactly, but recognition that my contributions had existed all along. Terrifying, I admitted. And exhilarating. He nodded slowly, as if processing information that challenged everything he'd believed about our relationship. Later that night, I found him in his study, staring at the wall where his diplomas and awards hung like monuments to a career I'd helped build. For the first time since I'd known him, Brian Mitchells looked genuinely lost. "What do I do now?" he asked without turning around. It was the first question he'd asked me in years that wasn't about research, analysis, or strategic planning. It was the first time he'd asked for my guidance as a person rather than demanding my labor as a resource. "You learn," I said. "You figure out who you are when you can't take credit for someone else's work." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost inaudibly, he said, "I never meant for it to go this far." "I know," I replied. And despite everything, I meant it. The man who'd introduced me as his personal chef and bedwarmer was finally beginning to understand that the woman he'd been dismissing for decades had just become his professional superior. For the first time in our marriage, Brian had nothing left to say. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to. Tuesday morning, I walked into the 32nd floor of Hartwell Industries for the first time as head of global operations. The elevator ride felt different when you weren't visiting someone else's office. When the key card in your hand opened doors instead of keeping you waiting in lobbies. "Miss Carter." A young woman with nervous energy and a tablet clutched against her chest appeared at my elbow. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, your executive assistant. Would you like me to show you to your office?" My office. The words still felt foreign, like trying on clothes that were simultaneously too big and perfectly fitted. The corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. My nameplate, Danielle Carter, head of global operations, gleamed on the door like a small miracle. Inside, everything was crisp and new. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, a conference table that could seat 12. "The team is eager to meet with you," Jennifer said, setting down a leather portfolio. "I've scheduled introductory meetings starting at 9:30. My team. People who would report to me, seek my guidance, implement my strategies." The concept was dizzying. The first meeting was with Sarah Martinez, the analyst Brian had consistently overlooked despite her exceptional work. She knocked tentatively, then stepped inside with the careful posture of someone accustomed to being dismissed. "Sarah, please sit." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "I've reviewed your portfolio. Your market analysis for the European expansion was remarkable." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You read my reports?" "Everyone. Your insights on consumer behavior patterns were exactly what the board needed to see." I leaned forward. "I want to discuss promoting you to senior strategic analyst." For a moment, Sarah looked like she might cry. "Mr. Mitchells always said my work was too theoretical. Not practical enough for executive review." Mr. Mitchells was wrong. The words felt powerful, definitive. "Your theoretical framework is precisely what transforms good strategies into exceptional ones." Over the next 2 hours, I met with 6 more team members. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. Brilliant minds constrained by limited recognition, innovative thinkers whose ideas had been filtered through Brian's conservative lens before reaching upper management. Marcus Chin, a junior analyst with groundbreaking ideas about cryptocurrency integration in international markets. Brian had shelved his proposals as too risky. Linda Torres, whose demographic research had identified untapped markets in South America. Brian had dismissed her findings as outside our current scope. By lunch, I understood exactly why Brian's department had been stagnating despite having access to extraordinary talent. He'd been sitting on a goldmine of innovation, too threatened by his team's capabilities to let them shine. "There's going to be some restructuring," I announced during our first team meeting. "I want fresh perspectives on everything we've been doing. Question our assumptions. Challenge our methodologies. Bring me ideas that make me uncomfortable." The room buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt in corporate settings before. These weren't people going through motions, they were minds finally given permission to engage. After the meeting, Sarah lingered behind. "Miss Carter, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How did you do it? How did you go from being invisible to this?" She gestured around the office. The question hit deeper than I'd expected. "How do you explain 20 years of silence followed by one moment of speaking up?" "I stopped waiting for permission," I said finally. "I stopped believing that my value was determined by whether someone else acknowledged it." That afternoon, Liam stopped by with a stack of international contracts and a smile that suggested he was enjoying the company's newest success story. Early feedback from Tokyo is exceptional, he said, settling into one of my conference chairs. They're particularly impressed with your cultural sensitivity protocols. Nakamura Industries wants to fast-track the partnership discussion. Nakamura. The same company whose contract I'd researched and strategized years ago, only to watch Brian take credit for the entire relationship. There's something else, Liam continued. We're launching a mentorship program for emerging female leaders. The board wants you to spearhead the initiative. What would that involve? Identifying talented women throughout the company who might be underutilized. Providing guidance, advocacy, strategic development. His expression grew serious. Women who might be in situations similar to yours. The idea sent electricity through my chest. How many other brilliant minds were hidden behind administrative titles or overshadowed by male colleagues taking credit for their work? That evening I called the first name on my list. Rebecca Foster from the legal department. I'd noticed her sharp analysis during contract negotiations, the way she'd quietly corrected details that everyone else had missed. Rebecca, this is Danielle Carter. I wonder if you'd be interested in discussing your career development over coffee. 3 days later we sat in a downtown cafe while Rebecca shared a story that sounded achingly familiar. 5 years of writing briefs that her supervising partner presented as his own work. Brilliant legal strategies attributed to male colleagues. Ideas dismissed in meetings, then repeated by men who received credit for the innovation. I've been thinking about leaving the law entirely, Rebecca admitted. Maybe starting over somewhere else. What if you didn't have to leave? What if you just had to step forward? Over the following weeks, my informal mentorship expanded. Elena Rodriguez from marketing, whose campaign concepts had been consistently rebranded and claimed by her department head. Amanda Kim from finance, whose risk assessment models had prevented the company from making several costly mistakes, while her boss received recognition for prudent fiscal management. Each conversation revealed the same invisible architecture of suppression. Brilliant women whose contributions were systematically erased, repackaged, or minimized by the men positioned above them. The pattern is systemic, I told Liam during our monthly check-in. We're not just losing individual talent. We're losing entire generations of innovation. What do you recommend? Transparency. Metadata tracking on all collaborative projects. Individual attribution for strategic contributions. Performance reviews that account for actual work product, not just presentation skills. Liam nodded thoughtfully. Draw up a proposal. The board is ready to listen. At home, Brian and I navigated our new reality with the careful politeness of strangers sharing space. He'd stopped asking about my work after I gently deflected his third attempt to insert himself into my projects. Maybe we could collaborate again, he'd suggested over dinner the previous week. Pool our expertise. Like before. I'd asked, meeting his eyes across the table. When you were the face and I was the voice you never credited? He'd looked away, understanding finally registering in his expression. Now he came home from his regional accounts with stories I didn't ask about, while I stayed late reviewing proposals from women whose talents had been buried under years of systematic dismissal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brian had spent decades reducing me to domestic functions while building his career on my intellectual labor. Now I was helping other women escape the same invisible prison he'd constructed around me. Saturday morning, I stood in what used to be my makeshift office, the spare bedroom where I'd written countless proposals that carried Brian's name. Boxes lined the walls, filled with research notes, strategic frameworks, and analysis reports that had never seen proper credit. I wasn't packing them away. I was reclaiming them. Each folder represented work I'd done in shadows, strategies I'd developed without recognition, innovations I'd created while pretending to be someone's assistant. This wasn't the past I was leaving behind. It was the foundation I was finally building upon. My nameplate might be new, but the mind behind it had been working toward this moment for 20 years. The woman who used to write from darkness had finally found her light. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sharing that light with anyone who hadn't earned it. 6 months after taking over the Global Operations Department, my assistant Jennifer knocked on my office door with an expression that mixed excitement and nervousness. Miss Carter, there's been a request from the National Women's Leadership Conference. They want you as a keynote speaker for their annual summit in Chicago. I looked up from the quarterly reports I'd been reviewing. Real reports now with my signature at the bottom and my strategic vision guiding every recommendation. What's the theme? Breaking through corporate glass ceilings. Jennifer handed me a formal invitation printed on heavy cardstock. They specifically mentioned wanting someone who'd navigated significant career transformation. The invitation felt weighty in my hands, like holding a diploma I'd never thought I'd earn. Speaking publicly about my journey meant acknowledging the years of silence, the systematic erasure, the careful reconstruction of my professional identity. It meant telling a story I'd never spoken aloud. When is it? Next month. They're offering an honorarium, but... Jennifer paused. I think they're more interested in your voice than your fee. My voice. The thing that had been buried for decades under Brian's assumptions and my own compliance. That evening I sat in my home office, the room that had once been my secret workshop where I'd crafted Brian's career from the shadows. Now it was simply mine with my books on the shelves and my certificates on the walls. I started writing the speech longhand, the way I used to draft strategies before typing them into presentations that would carry someone else's name. This time, every word would be attributed correctly. When they take your voice, write anyway. The title came to me as I stared out the window at the city lights, thinking about all the brilliant women I'd been mentoring who'd spent years whispering brilliant ideas to men who spoke them loudly. The speech took 2 weeks to perfect. Not because finding the words was difficult, but because choosing which truths to share required careful consideration. This wasn't about revenge or public humiliation. This was about recognition. Not just for me but for every woman who'd ever been reduced to a supporting role in her own professional story. The conference was held at the Palmer House Hotel, in a ballroom that could seat 800 people. I stood backstage listening to my introduction, watching the audience through a gap in the curtain. Professional women of all ages, some accompanied by colleagues, others sitting alone with notebooks ready. Please welcome Danielle Carter, Head of Global Operations at Hartwell Industries. The applause was polite, expectant. They knew my current title but not the journey that had brought me to this podium. I began with a question. How many of you have ever had your ideas presented by someone else? Nearly every hand in the room went up. A ripple of recognition passed through the audience. The shared understanding of intellectual theft disguised as collaboration. For 20 years I was the ghostwriter of someone else's success story. I researched, analyzed, strategized, and innovated in silence while another person took credit for my work. My voice carried clearly through the ballroom, each word deliberate and measured. I told them about the proposals written in secret, the strategies developed without recognition, the systematic invisibility that had defined my professional existence. I didn't mention Brian's name. This story was bigger than one man's opportunism. The most insidious part wasn't the lack of credit, I continued. It was how I convinced myself that this was normal. That supporting someone else's ambition was the same as fulfilling my own. The audience was completely still, as if afraid that any movement might break the spell of honesty filling the room. I shared specific tactics. The importance of documenting contributions, the power of submitting original work under your own name, the necessity of speaking up even when your voice trembles. But mostly I talked about the moment when silence becomes more expensive than speaking. You don't need permission to use your own mind, I said, reaching the conclusion I'd rehearsed but still felt nervous delivering. You don't need someone else's validation to claim your own expertise. The pen was always in your hand, you just forgot you were allowed to write with it. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Women approached afterward with stories that mirrored my own. Decades of invisible labor, brilliant insights attributed to male colleagues, careers built in shadows while other people enjoyed the spotlight. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a researcher whose groundbreaking medical studies had been published under her department head's name for 15 years, shook my hand with tears in her eyes. I submitted my first solo paper last week, she whispered. Your story gave me the courage. Maria Santos, an architect whose building designs had been credited to her firm's senior partners, pressed her business card into my palm. I'm starting my own practice next month. Finally. As the evening wound down, I noticed Liam approaching with his characteristic quiet smile. Powerful speech, he said. The board watched the live stream. The whole board. Every member. They're particularly interested in expanding your mentorship program company-wide. His expression grew more serious. They want to conduct an audit of attribution practices across all departments. Root out any systematic issues with credit allocation. The implications were staggering. A complete review of how intellectual contributions were recognized and rewarded throughout the company. Protection for women like me who'd been building careers from the shadows. When do we start? Monday morning. You'll be working directly with our Chief Compliance Officer. That night I called Rebecca Foster, the lawyer I'd been mentoring who'd been considering leaving the profession entirely. Rebecca? Turn on Channel 7. They're running a segment about the leadership conference. I watched from my living room as highlights from my speech aired on the evening news. The segment focused on workplace attribution issues, featuring interviews with women who'd attended the conference and decided to speak up about their own experiences. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. Saw you on the news. You're inspiring a revolution. Another message from Amanda Kim. My boss just asked if I'd be interested in presenting my own analysis to the executive committee. Thank you for showing us it was possible. The ripple effects continued for weeks. Women throughout the corporate world began demanding proper attribution for their work. Some companies responded with policy changes. Others faced uncomfortable questions about their promotion and recognition practices. Brian never mentioned the speech directly, though I knew he'd heard about it from colleagues. The few times he attempted conversation at home, his words carried a careful distance, as if he was speaking to someone he was just beginning to recognize. One evening, as I was reviewing applications for the expanded mentorship program, he appeared in my office doorway. Can I ask you something? His voice was quieter than I'd heard it in years. Of course. Do you regret it? The way things changed. I looked up from the stack of applications. Dozens of women requesting guidance, support, advocacy. Each folder represented someone ready to step out of the shadows and claim their own expertise. Which part would I regret? Finally being recognized for my work? Helping other women find their voices? Speaking the truth about what happened? He was quiet for a long moment. I meant, do you regret us? The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. I regret the version of us that required me to be invisible, I said carefully. But I don't regret becoming the person I was always meant to be. He nodded slowly as if processing information that challenged everything he'd believed about our relationship, our marriage, our shared history. The man who'd introduced me as his personal chef and bedwarmer was finally beginning to understand that the woman he'd systematically diminished had been the architect of everything he'd achieved. The irony was perfect. In trying to keep me small, Brian had missed watching me grow into exactly the person I'd always been capable of becoming. Me. I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. I was never just anything. I was always enough. I simply needed to stop waiting for someone else to hand me permission to be myself. The conference had given me a platform, but the voice had always been mine. I'd just forgotten I was allowed to use it. If this story of ultimate professional revenge had you cheering for Danielle, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Brian realized his wife had just become his boss after years of taking credit for her work. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
My name is Abigail Parker, and I'm 28 years old. One rainy night, my father screamed, "Get out," and threw my belongings onto our front lawn. I slept in my car, sobbing until sunrise. 24 hours later, I was unlocking the door to my $45 million waterfront villa in Palm Beach. Life can change in an instant, especially when someone you trust betrays you while someone you never knew makes you an heiress. Before I tell you how my life turned upside down and then right side up again, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had family turn their back on you. I grew up in a modest brick colonial in a middle-class Boston suburb. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was in a good school district, which mattered tremendously to my father, Richard Parker. Dad worked as a bank manager at First National Bank of Boston for 30 years. He believed in discipline, structure, and conventional success. His world operated in black and white, with no room for the colorful gray areas where I always seemed to exist. My mother, Elizabeth, was his opposite in many ways. She had a gentle spirit and artistic sensibility that balanced our home. She taught elementary school art and always encouraged my creative interests. When I was 15, she died from breast cancer. The day we buried her, I watched something in my father harden. He became more rigid, more controlling, as if strictness could prevent any more unexpected tragedies. My older brother Matthew got our father's practical mind. He studied economics at Harvard, Dad's proudest moment, and became an investment banker in New York. Matthew called home every Sunday, visited on major holidays, and sent expensive Christmas gifts. In my father's eyes, Matthew was doing everything right. Then there was me. I loved art history, museums, and preservation work. I spent hours sketching in my room or visiting local galleries. After high school, I attended Boston University on a partial scholarship, majoring in art history with a minor in museum studies. Dad tolerated this because I had a boyfriend, Jackson, who was studying business economics. Dad liked Jackson, often asking about his classes and career plans while barely acknowledging mine. I think Dad hoped Jackson's practicality would rub off on me. Practical careers pay bills, Abigail, Dad would say. Passion projects lead to poverty. During college, I interned at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Those were some of the happiest days of my life, surrounded by beautiful things with historical significance. After graduation, while Jackson moved to Chicago for a banking job, ending our relationship, I landed a position at Bennett Gallery, a small but respected establishment in downtown Boston. The salary barely covered expenses, but I loved every minute. I cataloged collections, coordinated with artists, and helped with exhibit installations. It was meaningful work that made my heart sing. Dad couldn't understand why I'd accept such a dead-end job when I could get an MBA or go into marketing. To save money, I moved back into my childhood bedroom. Every morning, I'd leave our suburb on the commuter rail, return in the evening, and face Dad's disapproving glances over dinner. "When are you going to get a real career, Abigail?" became his weekly refrain. Our uneasy peace shattered 6 months ago when Eleanor Sullivan entered our lives. Dad met her at a bank function. She was a wealth management specialist who had transferred from the Chicago branch. Eleanor was 52, 10 years younger than Dad, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and an expensive wardrobe. Within weeks, she was staying over. Within 2 months, she had moved in. From the beginning, something about Eleanor felt off. She was sugary sweet around my father, but cold when we were alone. She would reorganize the kitchen so I couldn't find anything. She'd make backhanded compliments about my appearance or job. "That gallery must be so fulfilling for someone with your modest ambitions," she'd say, sipping the premium coffee she'd convinced Dad to start buying. I tried to be welcoming, remembering how lonely Dad had been after Mom died. But Eleanor wasn't interested in being my friend or even my father's partner. She was positioning herself to be his wife and secure her financial future. "Your father deserves someone who appreciates his success," she told me once while Dad was out mowing the lawn. Not everyone understands the value of financial security. Some people just drift through life. The dig was obvious, but I bit my tongue. Fighting with Eleanor would only upset Dad, and despite our differences, I still loved him and wanted him to be happy. Our household tensions grew as Eleanor gradually claimed more territory. She redecorated the living room, removing family photos and replacing them with generic artwork. My mother's garden, which Dad had maintained for years after her death, was paved over for additional parking. Each change erased more of our family history, and with it, my sense of belonging in my childhood home. Eleanor's influence over my father grew stronger each week. Dad started criticizing aspects of my life he'd previously accepted. My vegetarian diet suddenly inconvenienced family meals. My gallery hours were irresponsible. My few art purchases were wasteful spending. One evening, I came home early and overheard Eleanor in the kitchen. "Richard, I'm worried about Abigail," she said in that concerned tone that made my skin crawl. "Living at home at her age isn't healthy. She's becoming too dependent on you." "She's saving money," Dad replied, though he sounded uncertain. "Is she? I never see her contributing to household expenses." And that job, it's more like a hobby than a career. You're enabling her to avoid adult responsibilities. I stood frozen in the hallway, blood rushing to my face. The audacity of this woman who'd known me for months telling my father who I was after he'd raised me for 28 years. Later that week, I received notification about a small inheritance. My maternal grandmother had left each grandchild $10,000 in a trust that matured on our 28th birthday. I was excited to put it toward eventually getting my own place or perhaps taking some professional development courses in art authentication. Somehow, Eleanor found out. Over dinner that night, she said, "Abigail, now that you've received that windfall from your grandmother, your father, and I think it's appropriate for you to start contributing to household expenses. We're thinking $800 monthly would be fair." Dad nodded along, not meeting my eyes. I was stunned. "Dad, I was planning to save that money for—" "You're an adult living in this house," he interrupted. "Adults pay their way." I reluctantly agreed, though it meant my independence would be delayed even further. The next day, I wrote my first check to Richard Parker and left it on the kitchen counter. A week later, I came home early from work with a migraine and found Eleanor in my bedroom, going through my dresser drawers. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She didn't even look embarrassed. "Just organizing. This house needs systems." "My room doesn't need your systems," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Please don't come in here when I'm not home." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "This is Richard's house. Every room is our concern." That night, she told Dad I'd been incredibly disrespectful to her. He lectured me about treating Eleanor with appreciation for all she does around here. The situation deteriorated further when I noticed some of Mom's jewelry missing from her old jewelry box, which Dad had given me after she died. A pearl necklace, a silver bracelet, and her favorite earrings gone. I approached Eleanor carefully. "Have you seen Mom's pearl necklace?" And some other pieces seemed to be missing from her jewelry box. Eleanor's face transformed into a mask of concern. "Oh, sweetheart, your father gave those to me. He said Elizabeth would want me to have them. I assumed you knew." I knew that was a lie. Dad would never have given away Mom's favorite pieces without telling me, and he certainly wouldn't have said Elizabeth would want Eleanor to have them. My mother's name had been nearly sacred in our house since her death. When I asked Dad about it later, he seemed confused. "Eleanor said you told her you didn't want those old-fashioned pieces. She said you were happy for her to have them." It was my word against Eleanor's, and increasingly, Eleanor was winning. I called Matthew in New York, desperate for an ally. "Something's not right with Eleanor," I explained. "She's manipulating Dad, going through my things, and I think she took Mom's jewelry." My brother sighed heavily. "Abby, you're being paranoid. Dad's happy for the first time in years. Can't you just be supportive? Eleanor's accomplished and sophisticated. Maybe you feel threatened because she's successful in ways you aren't." Even my own brother had been charmed by Eleanor's act. I felt increasingly alone. Around this time, an official-looking letter arrived addressed to me. The return address was from a law firm in Palm Beach, Florida, Harrison, Mitchell and Associates. I didn't know anyone in Florida, and assuming it was junk mail, I tossed it in my desk drawer unopened. As tensions rose at home, I began staying later at the gallery and spending weekends with my friend Sophia, doing anything to avoid the toxic atmosphere at home. My emotional state deteriorated as I felt increasingly isolated and gaslit by Eleanor's subtle manipulations and my father's growing coldness. The situation came to a breaking point on a rainy Tuesday in April. I was at work when the gallery owner, Ms. Bennett, asked me to help her with some banking paperwork. As we reviewed statements, I noticed something familiar: my father's bank. As Ms. Bennett scrolled through transactions, a name caught my eye. Eleanor Sullivan had authorized a wire transfer from another account. "Could I see that again?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Ms. Bennett enlarged the screen. There it was, a transfer from Richard Parker's personal savings to an account belonging to Eleanor Sullivan. It wasn't a joint account. It was hers alone. The transfer amount was $25,000. My hands trembled as I excused myself. In the bathroom, I called my father's bank, posing as his administrative assistant. The customer service representative confirmed that several large transfers had been made in the past few months. Eleanor had been systematically draining my father's accounts. I left work early, my mind racing. At home, I searched for evidence and found bank statements Eleanor had hidden in a locked drawer of Dad's desk. I photographed everything with my phone, documentation of transfers totaling nearly $120,000 over 4 months. When Eleanor returned from her shopping trip, I confronted her in the kitchen. "I know what you're doing," I said, showing her the photos on my phone. "You're stealing from my father." For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw the cold calculation in her eyes before she recovered her composure. "Abigail, your father and I are planning our future together. These transfers are for our retirement property in Florida. Richard knows all about it." "Then you won't mind if I ask him," I replied, secretly recording our conversation. Eleanor's voice hardened. "Listen to me carefully. Your father doesn't need the stress of your accusations. If you show him those photos or say anything about this, I'll make sure he chooses me over you. And trust me, he will. He deserves to know the truth." "The truth?" Eleanor laughed coldly. "The truth is you're a grown woman living off your daddy because you chose a worthless career. The truth is I make him happier than you ever could. The truth is he's tired of supporting you but feels too guilty to say it." I was so focused on her words that I didn't notice her reach for my phone until she had snatched it from my hand. Before I could stop her, she had deleted all the photos and the recording. "You little fool," she hissed, tossing my phone onto the counter. "Know your place." I was shaking with rage but managed to say, "This isn't over. I'll go to the bank tomorrow. They have records." Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger, but then she smiled, which was somehow worse. "We'll see about that." I went upstairs to my room, fighting tears of frustration. I needed to get those bank statements from Dad's desk before she could destroy them. But when I came back downstairs an hour later, I found Eleanor with a bruise forming on her cheek, a bruise that hadn't been there during our confrontation. "What happened to your face?" I asked. She just gave me a cold smile and turned away. When Dad came home, I was in the kitchen making tea, trying to calm my nerves. I heard Eleanor crying in the living room, her voice carrying deliberately. "I was just trying to talk to her about contributing more, Richard." She flew into a rage. I never thought she would actually hit me. My teacup crashed to the floor. "Hit her?" I raced to the living room. "That's a lie." "Dad, she's lying." My father stood with his arm around Eleanor, whose face was tear-stained, the bruise now darkened with what I realized must be makeup. "She's been stealing from you," I said desperately. "Check your accounts." "She's transferred over $100,000 to her personal account." "Enough," Dad roared. His face was flushed with anger. "Eleanor told me you might make up stories. She warned me you were jealous of our relationship." "Dad, please," I begged. "Check your bank statements. They're in your desk." "I already looked," Eleanor interjected softly. "She's hidden them." Of course she had. She'd removed the evidence while I was in my room. "I can't believe you would sink this low," Dad said, his voice shaking. "Accusing Eleanor of theft? Physically attacking her? What's happened to you?" "Nothing happened to me. She's manipulating you. She's after your money." "Get out," he bellowed, his face contorted with rage I'd never seen before. "Get out of my house right now." "Richard," Eleanor said with fake gentleness, "maybe we should all calm down." "No. I've had enough. If she can't respect you, she can't live here." He turned to me, eyes cold. "Pack your things and get out tonight." "Dad, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Now, Abigail." What followed was the most humiliating experience of my life. Dad followed me upstairs, watching as I threw clothes into a suitcase. When I reached for my mother's remaining jewelry, he blocked me. "Leave it. It belongs to the family." "I am family," I said through tears. "Not anymore," he responded, and those 2 words broke something inside me. As I dragged my suitcase downstairs, Eleanor watched with thinly veiled satisfaction. Outside, rain poured down as Dad threw more of my belongings onto the front lawn. books, shoes, my laptop bag. Neighbors peered through windows at the spectacle. I loaded everything I could into my 10-year-old Honda and took one last look at the house where I'd grown up. Dad stood in the doorway, Eleanor behind him with her hand possessively on his shoulder. Then I drove away, homeless at 28, betrayed by my father, with nowhere to go as thunder crashed overhead. That night, I parked behind the closed gallery, reclined my seat, and cried until I had no tears left. Rain drummed on the roof of my car as I tried to process what had happened. My phone battery died, completing my isolation. When morning came, I used the gallery bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. Miss Bennet arrived early and found me there, looking like I'd been through a war. "Abigail, what on earth happened?" I broke down again, as I explained. Miss Bennet immediately called her niece Sophia, my friend from college who lived nearby. "You're staying with Sophia until you figure things out," Miss Bennet insisted, pressing a coffee into my hands. "And take the day off. No arguments." Sophia arrived 30 minutes later and helped transfer my hastily packed belongings to her apartment. Her kindness nearly undid me again. How could a friend show such compassion when my own father had thrown me out? As I unpacked, I found the unopened letter from the Florida law firm among my things. With everything happening, I'd forgotten about it. I tore it open, expecting some kind of credit card offer or timeshare advertisement. Instead, I found a formal letter. "Dear MS. Parker, *, our firm represents the estate of the late Thomas Williams. As the executor of Mr. Williams' will, it is my duty to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary of his considerable estate. Mr. Williams was your maternal great-uncle and passed away last month at the age of 92. *, please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of your inheritance and the necessary arrangements. Sincerely, Daniel Harrison, Yesq. I stared at the letter in disbelief. A great-uncle? Mom had mentioned her Uncle Thomas occasionally, her mother's brother who had moved away decades ago and became estranged from the family. He was the black sheep who chose art over responsibility, according to family lore. Mom always spoke of him with a hint of admiration despite never having met him as an adult. With trembling hands, I called the number on the letterhead. "Harrison, Mitchell and Associates," a receptionist answered. "This is Abigail Parker. I received a letter about Thomas Williams' estate." Within seconds, I was transferred to Daniel Harrison himself. "Miss Parker, thank you for calling. I've been trying to reach you. Is it possible for you to come to Florida to discuss the inheritance in person? There are documents to sign and matters that would be best addressed face-to-face." I'm not sure I can afford a trip to Florida right now," I admitted, embarrassment burning my cheeks. "That won't be a problem," Mr. Harrison replied smoothly. "The estate will cover all travel expenses. In fact, Mr. Williams made specific provisions for this. Would tomorrow be too soon?" 24 hours later, I was sitting in a sleek office in Palm Beach, facing Daniel Harrison, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes behind expensive glasses. "Before we discuss the specifics, I'd like to give you some context," Harrison began. "Thomas Williams was a remarkable man. He made his fortune initially through real estate investments in the 1970s, but was always passionate about art. Over time, he built one of the most impressive private collections in the country." Harrison slid a photograph across the desk, an elderly man with my mother's eyes, standing in what appeared to be an art gallery. Thomas never married and had no children. He lived a relatively private life here in Palm Beach. However, he kept tabs on his family from afar, particularly after his sister, your grandmother, passed away. "He knew about me?" I asked, stunned. Harrison nodded. "More than knew about you. He followed your career with great interest. Your mother had written to him a few times before her death, sending photos and updates about the family. When he learned you were pursuing art history, he was delighted. He saw himself in you." I felt tears, threatening again. A family member who would have understood me, appreciated my passion, had been out there all along, and now he was gone before I'd had the chance to meet him. Thomas had investigators discreetly check in on you periodically. He knew about your position at the gallery, your dedication to art preservation. He was particularly impressed when he learned you chose that path despite family pressure to pursue something more conventionally successful. The parallels to his own life weren't lost on me. Now, as to the inheritance itself. Harrison cleared his throat. Thomas Williams' estate is valued at approximately $45 million. I nearly fell out of my chair. $45 million?
Yes.
This includes his Palm Beach villa valued at $15 million, his art collection appraised at $20 million, and liquid assets and investments totaling roughly $10 million. The room seemed to spin around me. Yesterday I'd been homeless, sleeping in my car. Today I was being told I was worth $45 million. There must be some mistake, I whispered. No mistake, Miss Parker. Here is a copy of the will, which specifically names you as the sole heir. Harrison handed me a document. Thomas was very clear about his wishes. He wanted his collection to go to someone who would appreciate its significance, not just its monetary value. As I scanned the document, seeing my name in black and white, the reality began to sink in. The villa staff has been informed of your arrival. Maria, the housekeeper, has worked for your great-uncle for 30 years and knew you would be coming eventually. She's prepared the master suite for you. The staff. I echoed weakly. Harrison smiled. Maria, the groundskeeper Carlos, and security personnel. The estate is quite substantial. He showed me photos of a stunning Mediterranean-style mansion overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, with manicured gardens and a private beach. This is mine. I couldn't reconcile the images with my new reality. All yours. The car service outside will take you there whenever you're ready. I've prepared temporary cards and accounts for your immediate needs until we can complete the necessary paperwork. As Harrison continued explaining details, I remembered snippets of conversations with my mother about her mysterious uncle. He marches to his own drummer, she'd said once. The family never forgave him for choosing art over joining the family business. But sometimes I wonder if he didn't make the wisest choice of all. After signing preliminary documents, I found myself in the back seat of a luxury car, heading toward my new home, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still reeling from the emotional whiplash of the past 48 hours. Your great-uncle was a wonderful man, the driver commented as we turned through massive gates. The whole staff adored him. As the villa came into view, I gasped. The photos hadn't done it justice. Stately palm trees lined the circular driveway, leading to a grand entrance. Flowering bougainvillea cascaded over elegant archways. And beyond the house itself, the sparkling blue of the Atlantic stretched to the horizon. Standing at the entrance was an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and a warm smile. "Welcome home, Miss Parker," she said as I stepped out of the car.
I'm Maria.
"Your Uncle Thomas spoke of you often. He would be so pleased you're here." And for the first time since my father had shouted those devastating words, "Get out," I felt like I might have found somewhere I belonged. The massive front doors opened into a soaring entryway with a crystal chandelier and marble floors. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating artwork that took my breath away, original pieces by masters I'd only ever seen in museums. "Is that a Monet?" I whispered, stopping before a luminous landscape. Maria nodded. "Your uncle acquired it in the 80s. He always said it was his morning sunshine, regardless of the weather outside." She gave me a tour that left me speechless. The villa had 8 bedrooms, 11 bathrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a formal dining room that could seat 20, and a professional kitchen where Thomas had employed a part-time chef for special occasions. "Antonio comes in 3 times a week," Maria explained. "But I've asked him to give you a few days to settle in before meeting him. There's plenty of prepared food in the refrigerator." The master suite occupied the entire east wing of the second floor, with a private terrace overlooking the ocean. The closet was bigger than my bedroom at Dad's house, and the bathroom featured a marble shower and a soaking tub positioned before a window with a sea view. "This was Thomas's room?" I asked, running my hand over the silk bedspread.
No, señorita.
Your uncle's rooms are in the West Wing. This suite was always kept ready for you. For me, but he never met me. Maria's eyes softened. He always hoped you would visit someday. He had this suite redesigned 5 years ago when he learned of your interest in art history. He said, "My niece will need a proper place to stay when she finally comes home." I felt a lump in my throat. This man who shared my blood and my passion had prepared a place for me while I'd struggled to feel welcome in my own father's house. The tour continued to the heart of the estate, the art gallery. A converted ballroom now housed Thomas's most prized possessions, displayed with museum-quality lighting and climate control. Your uncle acquired pieces that spoke to him, not just for investment, Maria explained as I moved reverently among sculptures, paintings, and artifacts spanning centuries and continents. Against one wall stood a glass case containing ancient Greek pottery. Nearby hung Renaissance sketches, Impressionist paintings, and contemporary works arranged in thoughtful conversation with each other. He kept detailed journals about each acquisition, Maria said, gesturing to leather-bound books on a reading table. The stories behind the art were as important to him as the pieces themselves. I opened one journal at random and found meticulous notes in elegant handwriting describing a small Degas bronze, its provenance, the circumstances of purchase, and personal reflections on its significance. "Your room is ready whenever you'd like to rest," Maria said gently, recognizing my emotional exhaustion. "Carlos will bring your belongings up." Belongings? My few hastily packed items would be lost in that massive closet. The contrast between my previous life and this new reality was dizzying. That first night, I stood on the terrace watching moonlight shimmer on the Atlantic, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. The villa was beautiful beyond imagination, but overwhelming in its grandeur. Did I belong here? Could I possibly manage this responsibility? I slept fitfully, dreams filled with my father's angry face and Eleanor's smug smile, interspersed with images of an old man I'd never met writing my name in his will. Morning brought clarity with the sunrise. I woke early and found Maria in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Did you sleep well, Miss Parker?" "Please call me Abigail," I insisted. "And not really, but I think that's to be expected." Over breakfast on the terrace, Maria shared stories about Thomas that helped me form a picture of the great-uncle I'd never know. He was private but kind, generous to his staff and to arts organizations, but suspicious of people who wanted his money or social connections. He had a dry sense of humor and read 3 newspapers every morning. Why did he stay away from the family? I asked. Maria considered her words carefully. Your uncle made choices his family couldn't understand. He valued beauty and meaning over security and convention. When they rejected his path, he built his own life. But he never stopped caring about his blood, especially your mother. He kept every letter she sent. Later that morning, I explored Thomas's personal study, a warm space with leather chairs and walls of books. In his desk, I found a file labeled Elizabeth containing letters from my mother spanning decades, the last dated just months before her death. In them, she shared family news, including mentions of me, my art projects as a child, my decision to study art history, my graduation. I also discovered a separate folder marked Abigail, with newspaper clippings of student art exhibitions I'd participated in, a copy of my college thesis, and even a brochure from Bennett Gallery with my name listed as staff. He'd been watching my journey all along, this shadow guardian I never knew existed. In the following days, I began to venture beyond the estate. Palm Beach was a world away from Boston, pristine beaches, swaying palms, and wealth on display everywhere. I visited local galleries and museums, introducing myself simply as Abigail, new to the area, not ready to claim my status as Thomas Williams' heiress. At the Nord Museum of Art, I met Lindsay Barrett, the curator of modern collections, who became my first local friend after we bonded over a discussion of their Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition. "You really know your stuff," she commented. "Do you work in the field?" "I did at a small gallery in Boston," I replied, still speaking in past tense, still adjusting to my new reality. "We should have coffee sometime." The art community here is smaller than you'd think, and it's always nice to meet someone who speaks the language. That casual invitation became my first step into building a new social circle, one based on shared interests rather than obligation or history. As April turned to May, I settled into a routine. Mornings were spent with Thomas's journals, learning about the collection I'd inherited. Afternoons often involved meetings with Daniel Harrison regarding the estate, or exploring the cultural attractions of Palm Beach. Evenings were for quiet reflection on the terrace, planning my future. I joined the Palm Beach Preservation Society, a group dedicated to protecting historic architecture and cultural landmarks in the area. At my first meeting, I met Jonathan Reed, the society's president, who had known Thomas. Williams was one of our most dedicated supporters, he told me. His annual contribution funded our educational programs for local schools. When I mentioned I was Thomas's great-niece, the news spread quickly through Palm Beach's tight-knit cultural community. Suddenly, invitations arrived for gallery openings, charity galas, and private viewings. The mysterious heiress was a subject of curiosity. The Palm Beach Post ran a small article, Williams' Estate Passes to Art Historian Niece, which thankfully included minimal personal details. Still, I began receiving calls from wealth managers, auction houses, and charitable organizations seeking my patronage. Daniel Harrison helped me navigate these new waters, advising me on which invitations to accept and which to politely decline. Your great-uncle was selective about his public appearances, he counseled. You don't need to be everywhere just because you can be. As I gained confidence, an idea began forming, a way to honor Thomas's legacy while creating something meaningful of my own. I would establish an art foundation that supported emerging artists and provided educational opportunities for underprivileged students. The Williams Parker Foundation would combine my great-uncle's resources with my passion for making art accessible to everyone. The seed of this plan gave me purpose beyond simply existing in my newfound luxury. For the first time since being thrown out of my childhood home, I felt excited about the future, ready to build something lasting from the unexpected gift I'd been given. 3 months after moving into the villa, I had settled into my new life. The Williams Parker Foundation was taking shape with help from a team of arts professionals and nonprofit experts. I'd converted one wing of the villa into foundation offices and planned to open selected rooms of the collection to small educational tours. I had deliberately maintained my distance from Boston, not reaching out to my father or brother. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I'd changed my phone number and only shared my new contact information with Sophia and Ms. Bennett, swearing them to secrecy. But the past has a way of catching up, no matter how far you run. One Tuesday afternoon, as I reviewed architectural plans for converting the pool house into a small gallery space, my phone rang with Sophia's name on the screen. Abby, I thought you should know, your brother called me looking for you. My stomach tightened. What did he want? He said he's been trying to reach you. Apparently, there was some article in an art magazine mentioning the Williams Parker Foundation and connecting you to the Williams estate in Palm Beach. Matt put it together and has been trying to find you. So much for privacy. Did you tell him anything? Just that you were okay. I didn't give him your number or address.
She paused.
He sounded genuinely concerned, Abby. I thanked her for the warning and ended the call, knowing it was only a matter of time before Matthew found me. Sure enough, that evening my assistant forwarded an email from him that had come through the Foundation's new website. Abby, I've been worried sick about you. Dad said you left after a fight, but I had no idea you disappeared completely.
Please call me.
We need to talk. Matt, no mention of his dismissal of my concerns about Eleanor. No acknowledgement of how he'd taken her side. Just, we need to talk, as if I owed him my time after he'd failed to support me when I needed him most. I drafted and deleted a dozen responses before settling on a brief reply. I'm fine.
Don't need anything.
Will contact you if I'm ready to talk. A week later, Maria buzzed from the security gate. Ms. Abigail, there's a man and woman at the gate insisting on seeing you. They say they're your father and his partner. Ice flooded my veins. My father's there? Richard Parker?
Yes, miss.
Security is waiting for instructions. My first instinct was to send them away, but something inside me, perhaps Thomas's influence, whispered that running from confrontation solved nothing. Tell security I'll meet them in the formal living room in 15 minutes. I took time to compose myself, changing from casual clothes into a simple but elegant blue dress. Armor of a sort. When I entered the living room, Richard Parker stood awkwardly by the fireplace while Eleanor examined a small Rodin sculpture with naked interest. Neither heard me enter. That's an original, I said coolly. Worth about $2 million. They both turned, startled. Dad looked thinner than I remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes. Eleanor recovered quickly, a practiced smile spreading across her face. Abigail, darling. What an absolutely magnificent home. We've been so worried about you. My father stepped forward. Abby, we needed to see that you were all right. As you can see, I'm fine. How did you find me? Matthew tracked you down through that foundation announcement. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? He gestured around the room. Your great-uncle. This inheritance? When exactly should I have told you? Before or after you threw me and my belongings onto the front lawn? Dad flinched. Eleanor quickly interceded. Water under the bridge, surely. We're family after all. We should celebrate your good fortune together. The audacity was breathtaking. I turned to my father. Why are you really here? Before he could answer, Eleanor moved closer, her voice honeyed. We've been thinking, with your new circumstances, we could help you manage all this. It's so much responsibility for someone your age. Richard has excellent financial experience, and I specialize in wealth management. And there it was, the real reason for their visit. My money. My inheritance. The very thing Eleanor had been after all along, just from a different source. I have financial advisors, thank you, I replied coldly. Dad finally found his voice. Abby, I want to apologize for what happened. I didn't handle things well. You didn't handle things at all, Dad. You chose to believe Eleanor over your own daughter without a shred of evidence. I know, and I'm sorry. When I saw that magazine article about your foundation, I realized what an incredible person you are. I'm proud of what you're doing with your inheritance. His words might have meant something 3 months ago. Now, they rang hollow. Are you proud of me? Or proud that I'm wealthy now? Would you have come looking for me if I'd just been living in a small apartment somewhere? Dad looked stricken, but Eleanor smoothly interjected. Family is family, regardless of circumstances. We should put the unpleasantness behind us and move forward together. Something in her practiced sincerity triggered a memory. I walked to a side table and picked up a remote control, pressing a button that lowered a screen on the far wall. Before we discuss moving forward, I think we should address the past. With another button press, security footage appeared on the screen, footage from the day before I'd been kicked out, showing Eleanor entering my room, rifling through my belongings, and pocketing my mother's jewelry. Eleanor's face drained of color. The villa has an excellent security system, I explained. When I moved in, I had Maria ship all my belongings from Sophia's apartment. Among them was Mom's empty jewelry box. It made me curious, so I asked my security team to run a check on both of you. They're very thorough. I clicked again, and the screen showed Eleanor at various jewelry stores, selling pieces I recognized as my mother's. They tracked down 3 pieces so far at pawn shops and consignment stores in Boston. I've already recovered them. Dad turned to Eleanor, shock and betrayal dawning on his face. You told me Abigail said you could have those. You said she didn't want them. Eleanor's mask slipped completely. Oh, grow up, Richard. She wasn't using them, just keeping them in a box. At least I appreciated their value. Their monetary value, I corrected. You never cared about their sentimental worth. I clicked again and bank statements appeared on the screen, the same ones I'd photographed before being thrown out. My investigators also found these. Systematic withdrawals from Dad's accounts to yours, Eleanor. Over $120,000 in 4 months. Dad staggered back, as if physically struck. Is this true? Eleanor's eyes darted between us, calculating her options. Finally, her demeanor changed completely, the warm, caring facade vanishing into cold fury. "You ungrateful little bitch," she spat at me. "You had everything, a father who supported you while you played at your little art job, a free place to live. I worked for what I took." "By lying and manipulation," I countered calmly. "By being smarter than both of you." Richard was an easy mark, so desperate for company he never questioned why someone like me would be interested in a boring bank manager with a needy daughter. Dad's face crumpled, the truth of her contempt hitting harder than any physical blow could have. "Security will escort you out, Eleanor," I said, pressing a button on the house phone. "The police in Boston have been notified about the theft and fraud. They'll be in touch." "You can't prove anything," she snarled. "I already have. Now get out of my house." 2 security guards appeared, flanking Eleanor, who looked ready to lunge at me before thinking better of it. As they escorted her toward the door, she turned back. "This isn't over." "Actually, it is," I replied. "Completely over." When she was gone, Dad slumped onto a sofa, looking suddenly old and broken. "I've been such a fool," he whispered. I sat across from him, maintaining emotional distance despite a surprising flicker of compassion. "Why did you believe her, Dad? After all our years together as family, how could you take her word over mine?" He rubbed his face wearily. "I was lonely. After your mother died, I threw myself into work, into raising you kids. Then Matthew left, and you were building your own life. Eleanor made me feel needed again, valued. So, you chose that feeling over the truth?" "I chose what was comfortable over what was difficult," he admitted. "It was easier to believe you were jealous than to consider I'd made a terrible mistake with Eleanor."
I'm so sorry, Abby.
His apology was sincere, but it couldn't erase the pain of that rainy night, of "get out," echoing in my ears, of "not anymore" when I'd said I was family. "I need time, Dad. You broke something between us that won't be fixed with one conversation." He nodded, eyes glistening with tears. "I understand. Would it be possible to talk again sometime? To try to make amends? Maybe. But it needs to be on my terms, not because you're impressed with this." I gestured around us at the villa. "And not because you need something from me. I just need my daughter back," he said simply. As he left, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, lingering hurt, cautious hope, and a new sense of strength. For the first time, I'd confronted my father as an equal, not as his dependent daughter desperate for approval. That evening, my phone rang with Matthew's number. "Abby, it's Matt.
Dad called me.
Is it true about Eleanor?" "Every word," I confirmed.
Jesus.
He exhaled heavily. "I should have listened to you. I'm sorry I dismissed your concerns. You chose to believe what was convenient, just like Dad did." "That's fair," he conceded. "Look, I know I can't just waltz back into your life, but I'd like the chance to try to make things right. No agenda, no asking for anything. Just reconnecting with my sister." I thought of Thomas, who'd cut off his family completely. Had that brought him peace, or just a different kind of loneliness? "We can talk," I said finally, "but I'm not rushing back to how things were before. Trust has to be rebuilt." "I understand," Matthew replied. "And Abby, I'm really proud of what you're doing with the foundation. It suits you." After hanging up, I walked through the gallery wing, stopping before a small landscape my mother had particularly admired in one of her letters to Thomas. Family was complicated, capable of both the deepest wounds and the most meaningful connections. Like Thomas, I would forge my own path forward, but perhaps without cutting all ties to the past. 6 months after moving into the villa, I stood in the newly renovated gallery space that would serve as the headquarters for the Williams Parker Foundation. The former pool house had been transformed into a modern exhibition area with classroom space for educational programs. Large windows overlooked the Atlantic, filling the rooms with natural light that made the artwork glow. "It's perfect," Lindsay Barrett said, admiring the installation of our inaugural exhibition, Emerging Voices in American Art, featuring works by 10 talented but undiscovered artists from diverse backgrounds. Thomas would have loved this, Maria added, her eyes misty with emotion. Using his collection to inspire new generations, it's exactly what he hoped for. The grand opening was scheduled for the following weekend. We'd invited art educators, museum directors, local officials, and students from area schools. The Foundation's mission, to democratize access to art education and support emerging artists, was already generating buzz in cultural circles. Creating the Foundation had given me purpose, but the deeper healing had come through therapy. At Lindsay's recommendation, I'd started seeing Dr. Rachel Coleman, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma. Our weekly sessions helped me process not just the betrayal by my father and Eleanor, but the lifelong pattern of conditional approval I'd experienced growing up. Your worth isn't measured by your productivity or practicality, Dr. Coleman reminded me during one pivotal session. You're inherently valuable, Abigail, apart from what you contribute or achieve. Those words had unlocked something inside me. Permission to exist without constantly proving my worth through accomplishments or compromise. My relationship with my father was slowly mending. We'd progressed from awkward monthly phone calls to occasional visits. Richard had sold the Boston house, too many painful memories, he said, and moved to a small condo closer to the city. He was seeing a therapist too, working through his own patterns and grief that had led to his vulnerability to someone like Eleanor. During his last visit, we'd walked along the beach as the sun set, talking more openly than we had in years. I always thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward a practical career, he admitted. I was terrified you'd struggle financially like my parents did. But I never saw how your passion for art filled you up in a way that money never could. And I never understood how scary it must have been raising 2 kids alone after Mom died, I replied. We both did the best we could with what we knew at the time. My relationship with Matthew had improved too. He'd flown down several times, helping with legal aspects of the Foundation setup. During his visits, I saw glimpses of the brother I'd been close to as a child, before ambition and Dad's expectations had created distance between us. Eleanor had faced consequences for her actions. The evidence I'd gathered had led to charges of theft and fraud. She'd ultimately accepted a plea deal rather than risk trial, resulting in probation, restitution payments, and community service. The legal proceedings had revealed similar patterns with previous partners. She was a practiced con artist who targeted lonely, financially stable men. More meaningful than these external developments was my internal journey. I was learning to trust my instincts, to value my perspectives, and to set healthy boundaries. I no longer felt the need to justify my existence or defend my passions. I'd also begun dating again, cautiously. Ryan Matthews was an architectural preservationist I'd met through the Palm Beach Preservation Society. Unlike Jackson from college, who had been my father's idea of a suitable partner, Ryan shared my appreciation for history and beauty. He understood the value of preserving the past while creating space for new voices. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect rather than need or convenience. Ryan appreciated my independence and supported the Foundation's mission without trying to direct or control it. You've created something remarkable here, he told me as we walked through the exhibition space the night before the grand opening. It honors your great-uncle while being completely your own vision. The Foundation opening exceeded all expectations. Over 200 people attended, including art critics from national publications. The Palm Beach Post ran a full-page feature on the Foundation's mission and the story behind it, though I'd been careful to keep the most painful personal details private. A month after the opening, I made my first return trip to Boston. I needed to visit the gallery where I'd worked and properly thank Ms. Bennett and Sophia for their support during my darkest hours. The city felt both familiar and strange, like a place I'd visited in a dream. I drove past my father's old house, now owned by a young family with children's bicycles in the driveway. The sight brought unexpected peace, new life and energy replacing the toxic final months I'd spent there. While in Boston, I had one final confrontation. Eleanor, now working at a small financial services firm after losing her banking position, had requested to meet. Against Ryan's advice, I agreed, choosing a public coffee shop as the location. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than in my memories. Her designer clothes had been replaced by off-the-rack business wear, her highlighted hair showing dark roots. "I won't pretend I'm sorry for what I did," she said after we'd sat in uncomfortable silence. "But I am sorry it went as far as it did." "Why did you ask to see me?" I questioned, keeping my voice neutral. Curiosity, mostly. I wanted to see what $45 million looks like on someone who didn't have to work for it. I smiled, recognizing the attempt to provoke me. "I'm working harder now than I ever have, Eleanor. The difference is I'm building something meaningful instead of taking from others." She studied me with grudging respect. "You've changed." "Yes," I agreed. "I have." As I walked away from that meeting, I felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. Eleanor had no power over me anymore. Neither her actions nor her opinions could touch the life I was creating. Back in Palm Beach, spring turned to summer. The foundation launched its first scholarship program for art students from disadvantaged backgrounds. We partnered with local schools to bring students to the collection for educational programs. Each initiative felt like a step toward fulfilling both Thomas's legacy and my own potential. On warm evenings, I often sat on the terrace where I'd stood that first night, shell-shocked by the sudden reversal of fortune. The same ocean stretched before me, but I was no longer the same person watching it. Life's painful lessons had strengthened rather than broken me. My father called on my 29th birthday. "I've been thinking about what to get you," he said. "It seems silly to buy anything for someone who has everything." "I don't need gifts, Dad." "I know, but I wanted to give you something meaningful." He paused. "I found the last letter your mother wrote to Thomas. It was in a box of her things I kept after she died. I never mailed it because, well, I was angry at him for choosing a different path than the family expected. I realize now how wrong that was." The letter arrived the next day. In it, my mother had written about my college acceptance and my excitement about studying art history. She'd enclosed a photograph of me at 18, beaming in front of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. "She reminds me of you, Uncle Thomas." Asterisk, my mother had written. Asterisk, she sees beauty where others see impracticality. "I hope someday you two will meet. I think you'd recognize each other's spirits immediately." Asterisk, I framed the letter and placed it in my office at the foundation, a bridge between past and future. A reminder that even when paths diverge, true connections remain. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. The foundation grows, my relationships evolve, and I'm learning that happiness isn't found in wealth or approval, but in living authentically and creating meaning from whatever circumstances we're given. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives, like being told to get out by someone we love, become unexpected doorways to our true path. The journey isn't always easy, but it's infinitely worthwhile. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's the people who stand by us when we're sleeping in our cars in the rain. Sometimes it's a great uncle we never met who recognizes himself in our passion. And sometimes it's the person we become when we finally stop trying to earn love and instead build a life worthy of the love we already deserve. What's your story of unexpected blessings that came from difficult times? Share in the comments below. And if my journey has touched you in any way, please subscribe and hit that like button. Your support means everything as I continue sharing stories of resilience and renewal. Thank you for being part of my healing journey.